Okay, guys, I'm going to make a start. So yeah, hopefully everyone's here. So welcome to the webinar, everyone. And today we're going to go through a topic called how to frame wood trusses effectively using Strucsoft. So we recently went through a name change from MWF. Many of you will be familiar with the name MWF, but we're now called Strucsoft. So if you hear me refer to Strucsoft, it is still MWF. So during this webinar, I hope to cover the following topics. So I'm going to go through how to prepare your model for framing wood trusses, loading appropriate truss families, so you can frame with using various types of families, creating envelopes using the truss tools, and then ultimately creating our trusses from the truss envelopes that we generate. So the first thing I'm going to go through is how we can prepare our model for modeling with the wood trusses. So first, we want to make sure our wall build-up is set and ready for framing trusses. So I'm going to select one of these roofs. The types are both the same, but if we take a look at the composition of the roof, you'll see that in the structure, we have a single structural layer. Unlike walls, roofs aren't affected by the structural layer rule, so you can have multiple elements within the structural layer here, because when we frame our trusses, when we frame with roofs, Strucsoft is taking into consideration the whole roof composition, the whole roof build-up. So here we have multiple layers, and when we define our trusses, when we define the placement of our trusses, what we need to consider is where those trusses are going to be located in the overall roof build-up. So for example, on the exterior side of the roof, we have a finish layer, which is 1 inch thick, and we have a substrate layer, which is also 1 inch thick. Our framing members are then placed after our membrane layer, which has 0 thickness. So what I need to consider right now is the 2 inch layer that we need to leave free for the substrate for our wood battens and our roof tiles in this case. So I want to place these structural framing members 2 inches from the top. Okay, so we'll bear that in mind when I start framing and it will make sense. All right, so that's one of the main things we want to consider regarding the roof. Next, we want to make sure that we have an understanding of the kind of trusses we want to create, because we can create trusses in loads of different ways, and there's various tools to create trusses in different ways. So it's a good idea to have an idea of how you want to generate your trusses when you're aiming to make those. Okay. Another thing we want to consider as well, so this is not really roof related, this is more of a wall related element. With our walls, we can set them as a structural material, and by setting it as a structural material, it can then be treated as a supporting element for our trusses. So when we select the wall, the truss will then recognize it as a supporting element. So I'm going to select the wall, or just one of these walls on the first floor, go to edit type, and then in the structure, you'll see that we have our wall composition with multiple layers, as you can see. The main thing that I want to draw your attention to is our structural layer in between the core boundaries, and that this layer is set as a structural material. So you can see the checkbox here is highlighted, and this will tell MWF or tell Strucsoft that this can be a supporting element for our trusses. All right. So I'll click OK on that one, hit OK. And that's pretty much the main things I would advise you to set up when creating your framing or when you plan to make your framing for trusses. There may be other things as well, but those are the first things that come to mind. Okay, so second of all, what we want to do is load in appropriate truss families. So we want to load in different member sizes so we can generate trusses of different sizes, use different members within the trusses. Funnily enough, we don't have to load in truss-specific families. We can load in wall framing families when we're working with wood, and those will also work as well. So what I'm going to do is go to the Insert tab, Load Family, and then from there, you can see it's taken us to our location where we can find all of our Strucsoft related family components. So I'm going to go to the 2024 folder. I'm working in 2024 today. And I'm going to go to the Trusses menu. So you'll see here we have various categories. We've got floors, walls, trusses, as we can frame in those different categories. So if I go to Trusses, you'll see we have framing components. We have the choice of metric or imperial. For today, I'll just use imperial. but metric is also available. And we can use manufacturer families or standard. I'll go for standard. And here we have the option to choose wood families, LGS families, and a placeholder as well. We're looking at wood today, so I'm going to select the dimension lumber and hit open. And we can load in families from this truss related folder. As mentioned before, we don't need to load them specifically from the truss folder. We can also work with any lumber that's already preloaded. So I'm going to load in just a few options here, 2x3, 2x4, and maybe a 2x8. Usually by default, we have a 2x6 in the file, so I'm not going to load that one. But if you needed to, you could also load any other sizes you need. Okay. So once those are loaded, we can now use those to frame our trusses. Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go into the process of how we can generate truss envelopes for our trusses. So what I'm going to do is go to MWF. In the MWF menu, we have the truss module, so we can activate the truss module from our MWF or Strucsoft menu on the left, and we can focus specifically on the truss related tools. From here, we have different ways of generating profiles or envelopes that we can use to generate our trusses. I'm going to draw my focus to the main element, the main roof in this model for now, and I will hope to frame all of these elements that you can see, all of these roof related elements. So I'm just going to switch to my main roof view where you can see we have our roof, we have walls, some other elements. Main focus is our roof. So to start generating envelopes for the roof, we need to first select the roof as the host element, go to MWF, and we have a couple of options here. So I could generate an envelope for the main roof using the common option, which will generate a truss envelope with a supporting king member in the middle. If you prefer not to have that king post in the middle, we can also just hit the create option, and this will do the same thing, generate an envelope just without that middle support. So with this create option selected on the truss model panel, I'm going to select my supports. So the first thing it's going to ask me to do is select the supporting elements for the truss. So I'm going to click on supports, and I'm going to choose the wall, which is facing us here on the right hand side, and I'm going to select the wall on the opposite side on the left hand side here as well. So these are the two supports I'm selecting. Once I've selected them, I can hit finish, and once you've selected your supports, you will see a window like this where you can specify how you want to align your heels in relation to your wall. Or if you're selecting a beam, if you've got any wall framing in place, you can also select a beam option as well. So as I've selected a wall, you can see we've got two alignment options, structural layer, which is taking into consideration the core layer within the wall. We can align to parts of the core layer, or we can take into consideration the whole wall thickness. I'm going to say the whole wall thickness for today. And actually, I'm prone to change my mind, so I'm going to say structural layer, and I'm going to align to the far side of the structural layer. Okay. Like I said, if we've created any wall panels, we can also select the top beam or the top track and use that as a supporting element as well. If I want to offset the heel placement away from the far side of the structural layer, I can use a cantilever offset just to offset it from its current position by using the plus or minus value. We can set the supports separately. I'm going to use the same ones for all supports because I'm going to keep the same options consistent, but you can uncheck this and specify them wherever you need to. All right, so that's step one. We select our supports. Step two, which is optional, as it says here in brackets, we can choose a ceiling. If you have one in place, you can select the ceiling as a point of reference. So when you're resting your trusses or when you're setting your trusses, they'll be placed in alignment with the top of the ceiling. I'm not worried about doing that, but if you wanted to do that, you can select the ceiling and then hit finish. If you don't have a ceiling, you can also hit finish as well, and it will also show a green tick. So that's step two in the process. Next, we want to define where we want to place the trusses, where we want them to span from, and where we want them to span to. Because of the way my truss is generated, I don't want to generate my trusses through these roof elements here, so these dormer elements here. What I want to do is just have some trusses generated in the middle, and yeah, we'll go on from there. So if I wanted to set the start and end points, we can choose a linear starting point. So we can select a point along a line or a linear element. And if you wanted to choose face, you could then select a wall face and say, generate my trusses from here. And you could set the endpoint and say, span them from here to there. You could do that kind of thing. You've also got the option of choosing if you're going to align your trusses to the exterior face of the roof or the interior face of the roof. So exterior face, our trusses are going to be aligned to the outer edge of the roof, so the top end of the roof. Interior face would be on the inner extent of the roof, so it would be on the inner side of it. So I'm going to align to the exterior face. I'm not going to define a start and end point. And on the right here, we can choose the spacing for the trusses. So I want the spacing to be around 2 feet, or should I say I want it to be 2 feet. And I also want to take into consideration that 2-inch offset that I mentioned earlier, based on the roof composition. So I want to offset from the outer face, from the exterior side, 2 inches, taking into consideration our roof tile thickness, and also that 1-inch batten that we had in the roof composition as well. So I'm going to define this as a 2-inch offset from the outer face. If you need to place additional trusses, so if you've asked for a 2-foot spacing, but the gap between the end truss or the last truss and the end of your roof is less than 2 feet, you could add an additional one to take up any space that's left. I'm not worried about doing that, and I'll explain why in a moment. So I'll hit OK, and it's going to generate a few truss envelopes just like that. Okay, this is exactly what I want, because if I generate trusses using these supporting elements on the left and right hand side, the profile or the envelope generated for the truss would then take on the shape of this part of the roof, which is not what I want. I want this to be a consistent triangular shape from start to finish. So what we can do is we can generate or copy any of these model lined groups. Because once we generate these truss envelopes, they're created as model line groups. So if I just isolate one quickly, you'll see that we have our truss envelope. And you'll see that when I select it, in the type selector, it refers to this particular truss envelope as CT003 because we have 3 truss types or truss envelope types generated so far. Okay, so you'll notice here that we have a part of the envelope taking the shape of the roof, which we don't want. So we can edit these model groups. It's simply just a group of model lines which have been grouped together. I want to remove this line here because we don't need to consider this. So I can simply select it and hit delete. Any other groups showing the same characteristics will also be affected. I'll have a few more examples of this later on, so it will make more sense. So there we go. We've just modified that one. And I want to copy these trusses so they span from start to finish. Okay, so I want them to be consistently spaced throughout. So I'm going to delete these two because I want my trusses to be, like I said, consistent. So I'm going to use the CT003 that I've just modified, and I'm going to use the copy tool or the array tool. And I can define the second point, number of trusses to array in this case. And I want to say from this truss, 2 feet. Okay, so we can generate our trusses 2 feet from that point. And let me just ungroup those. Totally forgot to do that. Okay, so filter, model groups. And I just want to ungroup them. We can create them as a group to start with, but we don't need to keep them as a model group. Oh, sorry. I am meant to keep them as a model group, not meant to keep them as an arrayed group. It's fine. Okay, so with our trusses generated, our truss envelopes, we can increase the number of trusses if we want to. So I'll just change this to 13. You can also use the copy option as well if you need to copy the trusses across. So I'm just going to move these into position. Okay, so it might be easy to align it. not easy to align it. Okay, so I'm just going to move this across. It's not allowing me to do that. No problem. Okay, fine. Okay, and I'm going to copy these trusses on the right-hand side as well. So we want to generate trusses all the way from the left to the right-hand side. So again, we can use array or we can use copy. You might find it easier to use array, but in this case, I'm going to unconstrain and use copy. Okay. And I'm just going to place these consistently across. Okay. So our trusses are slightly outside of the boundaries here, so that's okay. I can just get rid of anything I don't need. And we can simply delete any model groups that we don't need anyway. All right, so as you can see, we've generated our envelopes spanning the main portion of the roof. For our valley elements, so for these valley trusses that we need, we have tools specifically for these kind of profiles. I want to support these valley trusses on the existing envelopes for my main roof. So what we can do is we can go to MWF, into the Truss Profiles panel, and we have the Valley option. So when I select Valley, first thing it's going to ask me to do is select the main ridge line. So the main ridge line can be the inner edge, or sorry, the outer edge of the roof, or the interior edge of the roof. So it's hard to see them here, but you can see we have a line on the inner edge and one on the outer edge of the roof. We can choose our valley lines, which are going to be the lines where the roofs intersect. And again, we can choose the interior line or the exterior line. Just make sure you're consistent with the choice to make sure it behaves correctly. So I'll say finish. And then if we have existing trusses, we can use those existing trusses and select those as a reference to space our valley trusses away from the existing ones. I don't have any created at the moment, but we could use that as an option as well. And then supports, we can define supporting elements if we have them. In this case, we do. So I want to make sure I select this wall on the left and this wall on the right. So these are going to be the supporting elements for this portion of the roof. Once I've defined the supports, I'll hit finish. And again, we're greeted by this dialog box where we can specify where the heel alignment is going to be. So I'll click OK. And then on the right, we have some information related to the the roof we've selected. And we've got some options to define how we want to place these valley trusses. So building orientation, what this is referring to is the offset from the boundary, the outer boundary of our roof, towards the building. So it's building orientation towards the building. Ridge intersection is based on the intersection point from where the ridge intersects, and it's taking the measurement from this point towards the boundary of the roof. So we have two ways of defining where to place our valley trusses. One from the edge of the roof towards the inner side of the roof, and one from the ridge line towards the outer edge of the roof. I'm going to use the building orientation because I want it to be taken from this point and go towards the roof. So I can set an offset from the valley intersection, and that means when we get to this point here, what is the minimum distance that we can generate a valley truss? So I'm going to set this to 1 foot. We've got offset from last truss if we selected the last truss option. And we've got the spacing option where we can define the consistent spacing of the valley trusses. So I want them to be 2 feet on center. We've got offset from outer face, again referencing that 2-inch offset that we have from the outer edge. And you can generate stub trusses if you need to generate trusses with a shorter heel distance. So you can use the stub truss option. So I'm simply going to click OK. We're going to generate some more truss profiles, as you can see. And you'll see that these are aligned to the existing line work of the roof. So you can see these are going to be resting on the main roof portion there. I also want to do this on the opposite side as well. So again, we can go through the process very quick. So we go to MWF, Valley, choose our main ridge line and the outer edge, choose any valley lines that we have. select our supports, and then hit finish. Again, I'm going to simply accept the current settings, and I'm going to set the offset from valley intersect to 1 and the spacing to 2 feet. Okay, making sure I keep that outer face offset. And again, it's going to generate those profiles just like it did before. Quite hard to see these right now, so what I'm going to do is isolate the category so you can see that a little bit more clearly on how it's placing these. You can see there, straight generating these envelopes in relation to the slope of the roof, and that's how we can do it. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is show you how we can edit or manipulate some of these model groups. Okay, so I'm going to focus on this particular element, this particular valley here. Before I do that, I'm just going to remove these 2 trusses at the end. So let me just select this one and hit delete on those 2. What I usually generate at the end is standard trusses, not valley trusses. So you'll notice when I select these ones here, these valley trusses, they've got a type name of V002 because they're valley trusses. They've got the V prefix there. Our standard trusses usually have a CT prefix. So CT value there for standard trusses. So for this part of the roof here, I want to generate some standard truss elements, and I'm going to go to MWF, and I can use the common option as mentioned before, and we can use the create option. I'll demonstrate what the common option looks like. So if I click on common, you'll see that we have a few different options on how to define where we want to place these common trusses. So we can choose main ridgeline, which will be this one. We can choose our supports. And we can, again, define our heel placement. We've got some read-only information here based on the roof pitch, overhang, length, height, and heel height. Again, we can define a start and end point to say where we want the truss to span from and where we want it to finish. And we can define the spacing. So I'm going to say 2 feet on center and a 2-inch offset from the outer edge. Not worried about adding any additional trusses, but for now I'll click OK. And it's going to generate some trusses there. So let's just have a look. Okay. So we've got these 2 trusses that were just generated. And what I'll demonstrate now is how we can make an adjustment to these trusses. So I'm going to go back to this view here. So, okay, so we're looking at our valley truss. And now we want to make an adjustment to the valley truss purely because of the style of this window. We don't want to see the trusses through this window. So what we can do is we can make an adjustment to the truss profile that has been generated. If I isolate this truss that I have selected, you'll see this king member that is generated in the middle. If we use the create option, it doesn't generate this member, and we can simply generate the truss without it. I'm going to go into MWF, and under the truss tools, we have options to create scissor trusses and split cap trusses. I want to create a scissor truss because I want to replicate the profile of the window. So if we just show that again, you can see we want to follow this kind of profile here. So I'm going to select this truss, our T001 truss, and you'll notice that our T001 is the same as the truss behind it. They're both T001. So any changes I make to the front, this truss at the front, is going to affect the truss at the back as well, because they're generated from a model group. So I'm going to add an offset. I want to bring this portion of the truss above this part of the window. So I'm going to isolate this truss, and I'm going to go to Edit Group. Before I can use the scissor truss tool, or the scissor tool to generate a new profile, I need to get rid of this supporting element in the middle. I'm going to firstly delete that. Secondly, I'm going to hit finish. I've taken a measurement beforehand, so I know the distance I need to offset in order to replicate the window profile. So what I'm going to do now is select my model group, go to MWF, and I'm going to click on the scissor option. So when I click on the scissor option, you'll see we've got the option to generate, or at least define a length using inches, feet, millimeters, and we can use a range of units as well. It's reading out measurement units based on what is currently defined in the project. So I'm going to set the elevation height to 4 inches because the height from the lower end of this truss is around 4 inches to where the top of the window is. Sorry, not 4 inches, 4 feet, 48 inches. So we can apply to all instances of the same group, which means the other T001 truss envelope is also going to be affected as well. So I hit OK, and you'll see here that it's affected the profile by raising it up from the midpoint by 4 feet. So now when I go to my window, you'll see that the first truss, kind of hard to see, is no longer. Let me see if I can try and tell you what. I'll show you in a moment, guys, when I've done the rest, when I've done the other couple ones, there's a couple of trusses as well. So we can also affect these valley trusses. So I've made a change to the original T001 trusses, and I also need to, it's hard to see, to be honest. Let me do something really quickly. All right, so, okay, much better. All right, so now we can see all the other trusses which are also overhanging in this area. These were generated as valley trusses, but we can still make the same kind of changes. Again, these are separate groups. You'll see that this is V002, the truss behind is V003, so on and so forth. So each variation of truss envelope will generate a new type. So with V002 selected, I'm going to go to Edit Group. Sorry, before I go to Edit Group, I'm going to isolate it. So HI, and I want to Edit Group. Again, I want to make sure that this is set for me to use as a scissor truss or with the scissor truss option, making sure there are no mid supports or any overlapping lines anywhere. So I hit cancel, go to MWF and click on the scissor option. Again, I want to define a height of 4 feet and I'll click OK. Okay. On the odd occasion, you may find that one of the truss profiles doesn't want to play ball. That's okay. We have ways of working with that anyway. So I'll just show you another way that we can achieve the same result just using our manual edit options. So we'll go to Edit Group. What I can do is copy this bottom chord using the Revit copy, and I'll copy this above its current location by 4 feet. Okay. Then I'm going to hit Escape, and I want to copy these two members here at the top, and I want to bring these down so they're in alignment with that 4 foot marker that I've just placed. Now I can delete the bottom chord, and I can trim the line work to make sure that the profile is consistent. Okay, so you can see there, we have our profile. I'm going to use SL to split line and the trim tools just to make sure our line work is nice and tidy. Okay. So now we have our truss envelope. We can hit finish, and I can bring back the window where we can now see that the profile is looking a lot more acceptable, I guess. All right. I'm not going to bore you too much with those settings, guys, and making sure I change every single one, but you get the idea. You can modify and manipulate the profile to generate the truss envelope you need. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is focus on the hipped roof. So you may have noticed we did have a hipped roof portion here as well, and we can also create envelopes for those. So here we have the hipped roof, and just like before with the valley roof, I need to define some properties related to this particular roof. So first thing I'm going to do is generate some girder members, which can be used as supporting elements for our hip end and other features for our trusses. So in MWF, I'm going to go to the Truss Profiles menu or Truss Profiles panel, where we have the hipped drop-down menu. From here, the first option is girder. So I'm going to click on the girder option, and we can select our supports. So we can select the wall on the right and this wall on the left. These are going to be the supporting members for the girder truss I'm going to generate. I'll hit finish, and then we can choose the hip lines. So I want to make sure I'm using the exterior lines. So we are using these as our reference, the exterior parts of the roof as the reference points. What we should see here is the roof pitch. So I'm going to just go back to supports, just making sure it understands the supporting elements that I'm selecting. Okay. Once you select supports, you should always see this pop up. So if you don't, then you may have to do that process again. But you can see we've got the structural layer offset to the far side, and we're not going to add a cantilever offset. All right, so now we can see our roof pitch information here. We can now define how we want to generate these truss girders. We can generate multiple envelopes, or we can generate a single one. If we go to multiple, we can choose spacing, minimum height. If I just want to generate a single truss girder, we can select the offset from the hip intersect, which is where the hip lines cross or where they meet. And then we can set an offset from the outer face. I may want to generate a couple, so I'm going to go to multiple, and we can say offset from hip intersect. I'll leave that at 0. We don't want to offset away from here. I want to keep them in alignment. And the minimum height, I'm not too worried about that, because I might want to delete these anyway. So I'm going to set this to 2 feet. We can define the spacing if we want to space them consistently apart at 2 feet, and define the outer offset at 2 inches. I'll click OK. And we can see we've got multiple hip girders generated in these areas. So the minimum height would affect how small the hip girder can be when it gets to the edge of this part of the roof. I am only going to define one at the hip intersection. So technically I don't need these ones. That was just to demonstrate that we can create multiple if necessary. Okay. So I'm just going to select these model groups and simply delete them. Okay. So for the main portion of the roof, the main pitch here, we can also generate our truss envelopes using the standard tools that we've seen before. So if I go to MWF, use the create option, we can define our supports on the left and right. Click finish. And again, we can choose the alignment of our heels. Again, I'm going to keep this consistent throughout the project. And I'm simply going to just quickly define these settings here. I want to align to the exterior side just like I did before, and I want to space my trusses 2 feet apart. I want to keep the offset consistent at 2 inches, and I'm not worried about an additional truss at the end. Okay, so I definitely should have done this point at the start because now I've got too many envelopes, but it's okay. All right, so we don't need this one, that one. Okay, so I believe we've got too many here, which is not a problem because you can see that we have the main truss elements that we need there. So for the main hipped part of the roof, we can generate a hip end, but we can also generate individual hip elements as well. So if I extend the hip menu, you'll see we have hip and parallel jack, which would affect these parts of the roof. We've got hip, which will generate the member at the hip intersection or where the hip line is. And we've got perpendicular jack, which will then create our trusses for the sloping portion of the roof here. Hip end is a combination of all of these options here. So this is the quickest option, and it's going to be my preferred method today. So first we need to define the hip lines. Just like with our valley, we need to define the lines on the exterior side, and we can hit finish. We need to define side support 1 and side support 2, so we need to define them separately. So I'm going to select my support on the left first and set my heel alignment. I'm then going to select support 2, which is on the opposite side, and again define the alignment for that. Because we're looking at the hip end option, we also need to specify the end support, which is going to be this wall here. And then finally, if we're referring to any existing trusses and we want to space our hip end trusses from the girder truss that we created earlier, I want to specify that truss as well. So on the right, we've got some options related to spacing, the minimum length of the hip end members, so the parallel jack and the parallel jack members and the hip end members, hip truss members, sorry. And then we've got the offset from hip girder. So we've got a girder already placed. I want it to be offset by 2 feet. Offset from outer face, I'll have this set to 2 inches. And then the minimum length, we can make that 1 foot. That's fine. Beneath that, we have some new options. So these new options will allow me to define the spacing from my hip to girder. So that if I have a hip member which is going to attach to the girder, how much of a gap do I need to leave to allow the space, the member enough space to be placed without clashing with the girder? So based on the thickness of our members, our wood members, the member thickness is around 2 inches. So it's a 2x6 member, 2x4, 2x8. So it's 2 inches. I need to take into consideration half of that member thickness, because when we generate our truss envelopes, the thickness of the member is being offset equally from the center line that we see. So that model line that's generated, the thickness of the member is going to be placed either side. So it's going to be centralized. That line will be centralized on our member thickness. So I want to leave a 1 inch offset. So based on the position of the member thickness, we can make sure that the half of that thickness is taken into consideration. So we've got hip to girder, which is related to the hip to this girder member here. And then we've got hip to jack. So when we have our hip to the jack members, we can also choose to offset to these as well. And then we've got jack to girder if we have our jack members which are attached to the girder as well. So I'm going to leave a 1 inch offset for all of these areas. And then we have a setback offset, which is in relation to, so we've got the distance from the supporting element, which would be our girder, but then we've got the setback option, which is based on the individual truss members within the truss. So again, with the member thickness being offset from the middle of the model line, the setback offset is in relation to, well, I'll explain once we see it in the model. You'll see it in a moment. So I'll click OK on this one. And what I'm going to do is just isolate these model groups. Okay, where you'll see that there is a gap defined between each one. There's a 1 inch gap in between. So this is our detailing tolerance of 1 inch. And then inside of each of these, we'll also have our setback offset as well, which is an offset from the end of this member or the edge of this member to the edge of this member, because that is a 1 inch offset based on the thickness, again, the thickness of the member. So we can also take that into consideration. Okay, all depending on how you want to place your trusses. Okay. So now we've generated our hip end, we've generated our valley truss, and we've generated the main roof composition. There's one more area that I want to modify before we go into generating the truss, the actual trusses. So let's imagine we've got our roof and we have a room within our roof. Okay, so we want to generate some attic trusses. What I need to do is modify the profiles in order to create an attic truss. So we can go through that process and then we can see how to generate one of the truss profiles. Okay, so Each of these truss profiles or truss envelopes that have been generated are all the same. So these are all CT003. That means any changes I make to any of these CT003 profiles is going to affect all of the profiles in the roof. You may remember that I copied these profiles from start to finish along the roof. So there are some areas where the profiles don't need to be changed to a CT003 or they don't need to be changed from that. Because our attic room only spans this distance, we don't need the trusses this side to be affected. So what I'm going to do is select only the trusses visible in this view. And I'm going to generate a new model group from them. So I can go to Edit Type, Duplicate, and I'm going to call these ones AT001. Okay, so Attic Truss 001. So now I've renamed them. They shouldn't affect the other trusses in the model. Okay, so these will act independently. Although they are of the same group, they will change consistently, but they won't affect other trusses where they don't need to. So now I've generated a new model group. What I need to do now is edit the profile of the new attic truss profile here. So I want to keep these walls and this ceiling as a reference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the line work. So let me just make sure I can see it from the existing truss profile, so I can generate the new elements of the attic truss. So I'm going to select the heels and copy those. Okay, so I'm going to just move this one. Oh, wrong reference. It's no big deal. I'll change that in a second. Okay, so we can delete that one. And I want to copy my heel from this side as well. So once we've copied those elements, I'm going to extend these to the upper end of the roof. So I'm going to use the Extend tool. We can use Trim Extend. We can also use Extend Multiple Elements. And I want to extend these to my boundary lines here. All right. So now I've done that. I also want to copy my bottom chord, and I want to copy this in alignment with the ceiling. So again, I'm going to use my Revit copy tool, and I'm going to just copy this into the right position. Again, we can use the Extend Multiple Elements tool if we wanted to, and we can just make sure that the alignment is correct. Okay, in those areas. Last thing to do now is split this bottom chord, because we want to have a bottom chord on the left, bottom chord on the right. So I'm going to type SL for split line and simply split this bottom chord. I'm going to use trim this time, so I can just trim the line work so it meets nicely at the corner. And we have an extra member here for some reason, which I'm going to delete. All right, so now I'm going to hit finish. And when we check on the profile, if I just isolate those, you'll see we have our attic truss profile there. Okay. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we can look into how we can generate our framing for this attic truss. So I'm going to go to MWF, and we can use the Create tool to generate envelopes, generate profiles, but we can also use the Create tool to create the physical truss as well. So when I hit Create, it's going to take me into my presets menu. This is where I can generate any settings related to the truss, where I can save any configurations that I've used, and I can use them again at a later stage. So in the General tab, this is where we can choose our units. So we've got feet, inches, and 1/16 of an inch, and we've got millimeters. We can choose which type of truss we're creating. Is it a floor truss or a roof truss? For this example, it's a roof truss. And we can define the truss orientation. So the web orientation, are they going to be pointing upwards, or are they going to be pointing downwards? For the truss type, this will affect the members that show in the member sizes. So before I define this, I'll just show you what I mean. If I go to member sizes, you'll see the available catalog. And here we have a list of Okay, sorry, I didn't check this part. So if I go to other, for example, you'll see in member sizes, it gives us a range of materials to choose from. If we're specific about the material, so if we say it's LGS, you'll only see LGS related options. If you select wood, you'll see wood related options there. So I'm going to specify wood. We can set a project name if we want, and we can define the number of plies. So if we've got trusses, which are 2-ply trusses, we can set it to 2-ply, and we'll generate trusses, which are 2 trusses pretty much glued together as the 2-ply trusses there. We can define the webbing, so the placement for our webbing members, and we've got the diagonal behavior. So when we want to place diagonals, how we're going to define the placement of diagonals. So we've got intention, left to right, which is going to generate left to right members, and then we've got verticals only. Nodes will only place nodes. That won't make any sense right now, but it will in a moment. And then we've got verticals positions. If we don't want to generate any diagonal members, maybe we just want to generate verticals, we can say whether or not we want to generate vertical members or diagonals only. So we've got equal intersection, which will space the verticals equally throughout the space, fixed width, which will make sure the verticals are spaced at a consistent fixed width. And then you've got the diagonals only, which won't place any verticals. It will only place the diagonals based on your diagonal settings. So I'm going to use equal intersection, and we can set a top max spacing and a bottom max spacing. I want the top max spacing to be around 3 feet. No particular reason, but I'm just going to specify 3 feet for the top, 3 feet for the bottom. You can set them differently if you need to. You can also incorporate any hill offsets on the left and on the right. You can use a consistent hill offset for both if you need to. We can have verticals positioned at different parts of our truss based on any supports, any point loads that we've placed in the truss profile as well, or truss envelope, and at pitch breaks, so whenever there's a change in height. And finally, we've got the member sizes. So this is where we can define the members that we want to use to generate the truss. So the actual members we're going to use for the top chord, bottom chord, for the diagonal members, our webbing and our vertical members, diagonal and vertical members, and then the heel members as well. So if I wanted to specify particular members, specific members to be used over and over again, we can then define the member type that we want to use. So I could say, for example, imperial families, and we can create a catalog for these member sizes. If you wanted to adjust anything that's available, we can click on the add option here, and we can add and remove anything that we use consistently or anything that we don't use at all. So maybe I don't use the 2x3, so I can say remove, and maybe I want to reorder this. That's fine. So I believe we can drag. No, we can't. Okay, so we can then specify these 3 member sizes, 2x6, 2x4, 2x8. Okay. Now these are available in our pick list. We can reorder the members in this list as well, because this will affect which one is going to be made priority. So the member at the top is going to be the main member that we're using for our truss. Okay, so this is going to be the default option, whichever one is at the top. So I want the truss to be a 2x6, but if I wanted it to be 2x8, I could select the 2x8 option and say send to top, in which case we're going to be using the 2x8 option now. You can reorder these by using the options on the right. You can delete any profiles you don't want to use, and you can disable them as well. By disabling the option, that's ultimately saying you don't want to consider this one, you don't want to use it. If you want to use consistent member sizes across all of your truss envelopes or truss profiles, then what you can do is you can copy your list and you can paste it to any one of these other members. So you can paste it to your bottom chord. So for example, if I click on bottom chord now, you'll see it's a different list. If I go back to top chord, I'm going to copy the list and I'm going to paste the list here. Okay. And now you see the bottom chord is now matching the top chord properties there. If you wanted to copy them consistently across all options, you can say apply to all, and that will then apply the settings to all of these member types. Okay, We've got some physical options as well. So if you needed to have any, so you've got top track insertion width. You've got options to add extra insertion thickness if you need it. You've got chord pitch break. So when you've got the top of the truss, you can have the two members overlap, or you can have it open. So I'll say lapped. And then you've got chord end cut, which can be cut from the inside or from the outside. You've got the option to define these things here. For webbing, because your webbing members may be at an angle, you can add an extra length if the members are not square. So if they're not at 90 degrees, you can then add extra length to these angled members. And if you need extra space in between your webs, you can also add an offset, which will shift the spacing in between your webbing members. If you're using any braces or caps, you've got options for those as well, and wall truss sheathing options here as well, if you need them. We've got designer preferences, and this is related to the interactive window, which we're about to go into. And then we've got web on launch, which will generate the web automatically and replicate identical, which is going to make sure that all of the trusses of the same type are going to share the same settings. So when I generate the truss for one, it's going to apply the same settings to all of the trusses of the same type. Again, if we wanted to, we could save our presets so we can use them again at a later stage. So I could say save as. I could call this one attic truss. Sorry about the angry caps lock there. And we can then use this as our attic truss configuration. You can create different configurations for your other truss members as well, save them, and then you can also export them as well. So you can save the file, which will save it as an XML export, and then you can load it in by importing it in as an XML file as well. Okay, so now we'll jump into an interactive window. Strange. Where what should have happened is we should have our attic truss. So let me just see what's happened there. What's our rename? Okay. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. Okay. Okay. Hopefully the audio issues have been sorted. I'm hoping there's some kind of sound through the webinar. Okay, so let's see if I can find a view that is maybe a bit more exciting. I don't want to crash Revit, that's for sure. I think I should have unchecked the replicate identical option just for today. I'll know for next time. All right. Okay, so this will take a moment. And once it's loaded, we should see, I'm a bit confused by the profile, how it's adjusted, but we'll go back and have a look at that one. Okay. So I think at this point I can cancel, and it should stop the process with the trusses that have been generated up till now. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So Revit decided to close on me. That's okay. Hopefully I can get that started as soon as possible, guys. Sorry about that. these things that you can't predict. Okay. What I'll do, guys, is I'll quickly generate a new truss. It'll take a while for me to go back and do everything that I've just shown again. So I'll just generate a new truss, edit the profile quickly, and then, yeah, we'll see what happens. All right. Okay. Almost back in business, Chris. All right. Okay, so I'm going to open the model. Hopefully it can, well, it's faster now for some reason or something like that. But we'll see. All right. Okay, so I'm just going to pick a part of the roof that we can just look at quickly. Not too worried about replicating everything I've just shown, but I'll just create something really quick. All right, so I'm going to select this roof, go to MWF, make sure I'm in the truss module, and I'm just going to create a simple truss. Yeah, so I'm going to choose the supports. Let me actually choose a different roof. I know what's going to happen in this one. Okay, so I'm going to choose the roof, MWF, hit create, choose the supports just like we did before, hit finish, and then we can choose the alignment of the heels again. Again, I'll keep the options consistent with what we had previously, and hit finish. We're not going to select the ceiling, but we can bypass that one. And I want to set the spacing for the trusses to 2 feet. Just like before, we should end up with 3 profiles. One that I may have to edit, but yeah, we should be able to use that one. So I'm going to set offset from outer face 2 inches. Okay. All right. So the best profile we have is actually the middle one. So I'm going to select the middle profile. I'm going to go to Edit Group. So I'm going to isolate it first. Edit Group. I'll just remove the excess there. If I wanted to generate this as a attic truss, then we've seen the process, guys. I'm just going to quickly go through that now again, but I'll try and keep it as quick as I can. Okay, so I'm going to copy this line from the left just to the center, and maybe I want to copy this again with the specific spacing of around, we'll go for 6 feet. Okay, and I'm going to say 12 feet. All right, so I'm going to copy the bottom chord, and I'm also going to trim these lines. So SL, and we want to use this extension tool. All right, so we're good. All right, so now we've got our attic truss. I'm going to go to MWF, hit create, which will take us into the create options. I'm not going to bore you by explaining these again, guys. But what I'll do is quickly set the sizes of the members. So we'll go to General, make sure this is set to wood. Go to member sizes, where I'm going to define the wood size, the member sizes as 2x6 members. I'm going to apply this setting to all. So all of the members throughout the panel are going to be 2x6. They don't have an option anyway because this is all we have right now. But I'll click OK after unchecking replicate identical. All right, I'll let my lesson. All right, so now I want to go into interactive window so we can see exactly what will be placed. It should show us the attic truss. So you can see it's shown here. And I need to define what this member is. Right now it seems a bit confused based on this being the original bottom chord, this being the new one that we added. So I want to say I can select a member, so one of the manually added members, and I know the code for this one is a bottom track. So I'm going to type B on the keyboard, and that will allow us to change this to a bottom chord. If you want to know any of the shortcuts, we've got a shortcut option here, which will explain how to quickly carry out any shortcuts if you need to. So I'll say generate web, and that will generate the webs on the opposite side as well. And once you're happy with the settings, you can simply click OK. All right. All right. So we're generating some void quotes, which will generate the profile that we're asking for. Just got a little error code here, nothing to worry about. Okay. So you can see based on the modifications made to the original truss, we now have this attic truss profile. If I also wanted to replicate this on other trusses, I could then go into the settings and apply the same settings to the other envelopes as well. So final model was meant to be a beautiful work of art, but what we have right now is a single truss. It's kind of lonely, but it's a fitting end to the webinar, I guess. All right. I'll hand over to Maggie for any questions. Maggie, are you there? All right. Thanks for attending, guys. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. See you soon. Oh my goodness, what a piece of shit.